Good morning, everyone. This morning who has joined us. I see we have already 74 participants who have logged in. There are many more I can see on the waiting room. Welcome to this webinar this morning, which is presented by the Strathmore Business School. The title of our webinar is The Changing Role of the Board of Directors During This Unprecedented Time, COVID-19 Pandemic. Why are we talking about board? And I know that SBS is running many webinars to keep people in touch with the issues that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in a new way, because we do not have the opportunity to keep meeting the way we were meeting before. But today we're talking about the role of board of directors. And why talk about boards? I think we all know that boards are central to the governance of organizations. They are basically very central to the success of organizations. We know without an effective board, the chances of an organization meeting its objectives are sometimes compromised. When you face difficult times that we like we are currently facing with the COVID-19 pandemic, it is a time when leadership is really in high demand. Leaders have to step forward. And in our case here, the first group that provides leadership to organizations, whether they are government, whether they are not-for-profit, whether they are business organizations, is the apex of that organization, which is basically the board. So it is important that we actually talk about boards and how they can step up and what really is expected of them. We'll be looking at the role of board of directors generally. We'll look at the perspectives of COVID-19 so that we know what we are actually talking about. And we then will look at the impact of this pandemic and these unprecedented times on the role of the board. You know, is it changing? Which areas are more important that the board has to look at, and how the board can then be effective in ensuring that the organization is able to navigate during this pandemic and then emerge at the other end of the pandemic and be able to ensure that the organization can survive and be able to meet its objectives in the future. There is a survival mode that we have to talk about now so that we can be able to live another day to be able to pursue the objectives of the organizations which these organizations pursue or have set for themselves. My name is James Wambugu. I will be moderating this webinar. And to help us navigate through this topic, we have an East African panel made of some great East Africans, 3 of them. I will introduce them very quickly, starting with the lady in the panel. As they say, ladies first. I'll start with Caro Musyoka. Caro, I have to say, is many things, and I would not be able to state everything that Caro is, but just so that we can see the relevance of her being in this webinar. Professionally, she is a banker. She's worked for Barclays. She's worked for Citibank. She finished her formal employment as the CEO of KREB Bank, Kenya's first microfinance bank. Post formal employment, Caro sits on a number of boards, has sat on a number of boards in the past, currently sits in the board of East African Breweries, BAT, Kenya Airways. She does training in leadership and corporate governance for CEOs and C-suite managers. She has been an academic director of the corporate governance programs at Strathmore Business School. She has a number of other international connection and partnership that she's involved also in training and on leadership and corporate governance. She's a holder of Bachelor of Law degree from Nairobi University, Master of Law from Cornell University. That is Caro Musyoka. We also have Dr. Robin Chibuka. Dr. Robin Karo is from Kenya. Dr. Chibuka is from Uganda. As I said, we have three great East Africans. Dr. Chibuka is a holder of BA Economics from Yale University. He also holds a PhD Economics from Harvard University, where he has actually been a lecturer before. He's a senior economist for the last 32 years, largely with the International Monetary Fund, one-time country representative for IMF in Ghana. As I said, he's lectured in Harvard, in Makerere University in Uganda. He has consulted with a number of organizations and governments in Africa on economics, on development issues. Currently, he's the chairman of Standard Chartered Bank Uganda, Uganda Bureau of Statistics, and is also a member of the advisory board of Strathmore University, Uganda. Last but not least, from Tanzania, John Ulanga. John is country director for Tanzania for Trademark East Africa. Those of you who know what Trademark does, it's been trying to drive the growth of inter-country trade among the East African community countries, and been very successful. He has previously worked in the oil and gas, BG East Africa, which was bought by Shell. He has been an executive director of Foundation of Civil Society in Tanzania. John is currently chairman of a number of entities, University Council of Herbert Kairuki University, chairman of KCBTZ, Serengeti Breweries, Tanzania Financial Services for Underserved Settlements. He's a member of a board of several organizations and companies in Tanzania. And is a fellow of Africa Leadership Initiative, among many others. I cannot read all of them. And John is a CPA. He also has a BCom and a Master's in Development Policies from Geneva. So now I want to launch straight into our webinar. As I said, first thing I think we would like to know from our panelists is what is generally expected of directors of an organization, and we essentially want to look at the role of a board and a board of directors, and are directors needed more at certain times than others, for example, during times of great crisis. And now I want to start again with the lady in the panel, Carol Musyoka. Over to you, Carol, if you can please give us your reflections, and I will be coming to Dr. Chibuka.
Thanks very much, James, and I'm really honored to be here. It's great to see so many people who signed up for this webinar. I've got two of my chairmen here. I've got Martin Oduor-Otieno for EABL and Michael Joseph, surprisingly, for Kenya Airways. So it's great to have such good company on this webinar. I just have to note that Dr. Bitangendem was in this group hiding under the name admin. So I'm wondering if he's wearing shorts or trousers as he's wont to do during webinars. So great to be here. So you're asking about the role of the board, James, and it's largely threefold. The role of a board at any given time is oversight, for insights and foresight. So to provide oversight over what management and the organization has done in the past, to provide insights over what they're doing currently, and to provide foresight over the strategy that's presented by management in terms of, is this the right strategy for the current time? So that's primarily our role on a day-to-day basis. And right now, as boards, what we are being asked to do largely is really provide insights about what's going on and to provide foresight as to where we think management needs to be thinking about going forward. That's how I can very quickly say what our role is.
Thank you very much, Carol. Dr. Chibuka?
Yes, thank you very much, James. It's also a great honor to be here. There are quite a number of people I recognize and I welcome them. It's really great and I look forward to the interactions today. I think Carol has covered the ground very effectively. Clearly, a board is a steward of an institution to govern in the present, but also to provide guidance and direction for the future. And I think Carol broke down those issues very well. That's the oversight. I think you have to have a very broad understanding of the industry in which you're working in to be able to provide that kind of oversight. And that also requires that you need in-depth understanding, maybe not as individual directors, but as a group, you should have the diversity to be able to have the ability to collect a number of insights, which can then be provided to the organization. And of course, foresight is very critical because you govern not only in the present and you give direction in the future. So you clearly need to be able to see trends which are shaping up and be able to devise strategies which will be able to take the organization into the future, to take advantage of the opportunities in order to serve your stakeholders as effectively as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chibuka. Between you and Caro, is there a time directors are needed more than other times? Just I'm asking this question because when we come to talk about whether the role is changing, is there times when directors are needed more than other times?
Okay, I would think clearly directors are most needed in a time of crisis. Clearly, there is going to be a breaking moment. If you will, you are reaching a crossroads and you have to choose the direction in which to go. And as we indicated that the three roles of the board are going to be very critical at this juncture because you need to find out very quickly how to give direction and develop new strategies to guide the organization. So at this time, it becomes very, very critical that the board works together with management and is able to canvass and understand the situation, but also to keep aligned all the interests of the various stakeholders so that you can be able to provide guidance in that particular situation. Now, some situations are more difficult than others because they may be unprecedented. And when you are in a crisis, there are a lot of new risks which are coming into play. And the board may not be fully aware of those risks. And even if they come up and you become aware of them, you need to gather a lot of information to be able to sift through, find out what priorities are, and then guide the institution during that particular period of time.
Thank you, Dr. Chibuka. Caro, you want to add something before I go to the next?
So I 100% echo what Dr. Chibuka is saying. The danger of operating just within management is there's a potential to create an echo chamber because you all work together, you're all working through a crisis together. You can all start to sound and think the same. And the beauty of having directors, particularly during a crisis, is they then provide challenges around that group thing. So it's to move away from the echo chamber to bounce your ideas off. You know, the English say the misery loves company. Sometimes you want to have a bigger group of people who are also seeing the pain that you're in and who can be able to challenge you. So, one of the most critical times for having your board is definitely when you're walking through a fire and who can be able to challenge and perhaps provide a very different way of looking at something and a different perspective.
Thank you very much, Caro. I think we're going very well. I want to bring in John Ulanga, and I want to go to another area that we need to interrogate. And this is for us to even begin to talk about how boards are going to respond. We need to understand this crisis that we are currently going through. We're calling it unprecedented time. And it's indeed unprecedented because people have just focused on, when they look at something like this before, they talk about 1918, the Spanish flu. We've all seen how the world has panicked, how the world has struggled, things changing overnight. I want to maybe ask John, is COVID, what are your perspectives on COVID-19, especially on business? And is it as serious as it need to look like, to be, or have we panicked too much? Can the businesses recover from the disruption of COVID-19, and how quickly?
Thanks, James. I think those are too many questions, but I'll try to interrogate them. I think one, it is unprecedented for exact reason you have said. We had the 1918, or there was the 1918 Spanish influenza. But by then, the world was not as connected as it is. The world economy was not as interconnected as it is now. We have had, and it was mainly to a large extent a health crisis. We have had the 2008, a great recession, the global financial crisis. But it was to a large extent limited to either financial sector, real estate sector. So we have had those type of crises, either health, we've had Ebola outbreak here and there, but either they were short-lived or confined to a large extent to particular geographical areas, you see. So we have had those crises, either health or economic crisis, but they remained either geographical focused, sectoral focused, you see, or they either remained a health crisis or an economic crisis. But this one is unprecedented because it has touched every geographical area, it has touched every sector, you see. So we have seen low export demand for everything because, of course, supply chains are also highly interrupted. So we have seen disruption for supply chains, global and local supply chains. We have seen suppressed private consumption because people now are kind of in the saving mode. We have seen international travel bans to a level that we have never seen before, impacting various sectors, but especially more so tourism. But beyond macro, we have seen a pandemic that is highly endangering survival of humanity. So lives are impacted, livelihoods are impacted. So it's unprecedented because it has caused disruption in every sector. It has caused disruption in companies. It has caused disruption in our customer base. It has caused tensions amongst politicians. You could see political tensions amongst countries. So for those and many other reasons, this is unprecedented, and it's a challenge for companies. And to your question on whether we can survive, I think first, companies that will survive are companies that are resilient. You know, you don't prepare for war during wartime, you prepare for war during peacetime. So it means, to what extent as companies did we prepare for worst case scenarios? To what extent did we take our risk assessment as robust as they should have been? And to what extent have we put mitigation measures for worst case scenario like we have seen? So companies that would survive are those that were either well prepared before or are using the time we have now to really think on systems, structures, and processes that will minimize the impact now and maximize the utilization of procedures that will maximize either a revenue generation or cost minimization. Allow me to pause there for now.
Thank you very much,
James.
Yes,
if I may add a little bit, I fully concur with what John has said. Just to give a bit of a dimension to the macroeconomic disruption, the IMF is now estimating that the global growth rate will be actually negative 3%, and for Africa, GDP would decline by 1.6%. But compared to October 2019, this is growth levels have been revised down by 6.4 percentage points for the global GDP and negative 5.2% for Africa. Clearly, that is very, very unprecedented. And also the IMF in its 2020 World Economic Outlook has estimated that a total of $90 billion have taken flight from emerging economies. And this is the largest capital flight on record. So it's a massive, massive macroeconomic impact. And I also agree again with John that this is unprecedented. In my view, it's really a paradigm shift. So there is a lot of values, the way we do things, the way we interrelate to each other is also being fundamentally changed. And I think it's only those boards with a growth mindset which will be able to navigate through this situation to either help the institutions survive and then hopefully thrive in the near future and the long term.
Thank you for that intervention, Dr. Chibuka. I want to also ask Caro to weigh in on this one, especially, I mean, is it time for new businesses to be born and added to the one that existed?
Thanks very much, James. So right now, I would say that for many organizations, you're really largely looking at, can we survive this? So there's two kinds of business models now. One is, can we survive within our current model? And one is, how do we pivot, because our business model at its barest minimum is being completely undermined by what's going on. So for example, in the educative space, you know, a lot of them have had to pivot towards the online learning. Some were more prepared than others. What are the opportunities in the educative space? I've written about this. You know, there's now a lot of opportunity to provide your services beyond your local jurisdiction, because the minute you go onto the remote learning platform, you're no longer limited to the neighborhood in which you're getting your students. And this goes beyond just university. This goes to high school and to primary. Suddenly you can provide services, if you were based in Kampala, to students who perhaps were in Gulu, if they have the capacity to have the infrastructure for that. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities that are in certain industries. In certain industries where you can't necessarily pivot because your product is one that's used in a certain place, that becomes challenging. It then becomes a question of, can you distribute your product and distribute it quickly? For those that are in the travel and the hospitality space, for example, especially the hotels, that's a huge struggle. It really depends, James, on which industry it is. It's very tactical, it's very specific to an industry. And what we're seeing in the hospitality space is just, you know, a struggle to be able to provide the same level of service, but that hospitality is a very high touch point industry. So how are you able to open a hotel and provide services to clients and still be able to give them the safety? Earlier on, I was in a conversation about somebody who was attending a Koroga. So for those of us who are coming from East Africa, Koroga is a very Kenyan phenomenon where you go into a restaurant and you do all the cooking, which is a bit of an oxymoron, that you go to a restaurant and do your own cooking. But they're talking about that. So, you know, you go into a restaurant, you do your own cooking. And one Koroga restaurant opened up, but very few people came in, and they were quite happy. They opened it just on Sunday when the curfew was extended to 9, but very few people came because everyone was sort of looking over their shoulder, wondering when are the police going to bust in after 7. But the challenge there is, how are you able to provide that service and provide it in a safe environment where, you know, you've got people coming in very close proximity. There's loud music, people are talking. When there's loud music, you know, you tend to shout more, and then therefore there's a lot more aerosol coming out. So huge challenges, James. But again, also some pivoting happening. So this person was giving the example that actually what one Koroga restaurant did is they took their service to their clients and they said, we can bring all the ingredients, including the cooking pots and the fire and everything, to your house, and we'll just give you all the ingredients and you do it. So you're seeing people who are actually, you know, learning how to run while sort of jogging on the spot, because they've got to maintain their business and pivot very quickly to provide and to remain relevant in this time.
Thank you, Caro. I do actually jog on the same spot, so I understand what you're saying. I want to invite Shadrach to guide us on the first question, and then we can go to the next set of discussion area.
Thank you, James. And here is where we bring on the participants just to have a feel of what are they feeling about the effect of COVID on their role as directors. And so just take a second, give us your feedback on this.
And as you do that, I want to get back to business and the crux of our conversations today. I think so far we've had very interesting thoughts, and I believe that for those of you who are sitting in boards, for those of you who are leading organizations, you're picking things that maybe you hadn't thought about, maybe you have thought about, but you've gotten a new perspective. Let's keep hearing from our panelists as you hear the really focus, very succinct to their answers, but very rich in the answers they are giving us. So I want us to go to the crux of our conversation today, which is, fine. So yeah, we have directors, we have talked about their role, we have talked about what you're experiencing currently. How is the current pandemic, how is the current unprecedented time? And the word unprecedented is used deliberately here because as John Olanga said, we haven't had anything like this for a long time. And maybe we have never had anything like this because the world in the past was different. So in this sort of situation, and you know, events like this sometimes birth or begin new ways of human beings looking at things. Is this pandemic, is this unprecedented time, is it changing the role of the boards? What impact is it having, both on the role of the board as a whole, on individual directors, on the focus on stakeholders? Are there some stakeholders who become more relevant at this time? And what can we draw on from that we've done in the past, although it has been mentioned a little bit by John previously? What can we draw on that the board has done in the past to help us handle this new role that the board has been thrust upon, that has been thrust upon the board? So I'll go in this order. I'll start with Robin. I'll invite Carol, and then I'll invite John, and then if you have any clarification, I will, and then after that we will move to questions and answers. So over to you, Dr. Shibuka.
Yes, thank you very much, James. As I indicated earlier, there has been a paradigm shift because of COVID-19. So in that situation, the board the role of the board doesn't change, but the task they face becomes very, very difficult because they now have to move in uncharted water. There are a lot of risks. Some of them are still to be seen, and the board may actually be dealing with only about 5% of the risks which they are aware of. Many of them may be lurking out there in the dark. But at the same time, it has to act. It has to be able to direct the institution. And in my view, certain skills are going to become extremely important. One of them is going to be empathy. As a board, you have to be able to listen carefully to all your stakeholders, take their views into hand, and be able to help them steer the organization to be able to serve those interests. But again, you are facing a lot of risks, and you are clearly stepping into the darkness. Each step is a step in the darkness. But I think you have to recognize that at that point, you cannot address all the issues, and you have to act step by step as you go along. But communication is going to be extremely important to assure all the stakeholders, because they're all facing major uncertainty. It's a period of a health crisis which affects individuals, homes, corporations, and so on and so forth. So everybody is going to have a lot of anxiety. And it's particularly important that leaders, board members, act very calmly and try to assure the stakeholders to calm the situation and be able to plan ahead and be able to address the issues as they come along. It's not going to be an easy situation. And I think you have to obviously start to use digital applications a great deal more because of physical separation. In Uganda, we've had a total lockdown. So there was no way you could be able to meet physically with various board members. So you have to use the digital platform, but also when you communicate with staff or fellow members or other stakeholders, it's important to, as I say, to use empathy, try to check them out, find out how they are personally, because I think that's very critical to building a very effective communication and a basis to provide trust in this very, very difficult situation. You also, as a board, have to take quick action. I've been particularly impressed by the telcos in Uganda, which have actually suspended their fees on mobile income. This, I believe, has been a win-win situation where the clients are very, very happy because they're able to utilize the platform very effectively. And I think the telcos themselves have benefited tremendously, because I think that industry is now one of the very fastest growing industries because of the action they have taken. We can also look at banks in Uganda. They have been very quick to implement the directives from the regulators to suspend interest on loan payments and to restructure some of the loans. That, I think, has come in very handy. It's benefited a lot of our clients. And that has been a very effective and very quick way to provide the required services to the stakeholders, particularly the clients. I think I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much. Essentially, you are saying there are things we are ready to do now that we wouldn't have been doing before. For example, restructuring a loan or suspending interest. I'm sure if you ask a bank maybe a year ago, can you do that? They would say under no circumstances. So, yeah, thank you for that. I want to go to Caro, maybe your reflections on this, the changing role.
So, James, I'll draw on my experience. Over the last 15 years, I've sat on 20 boards, for-profit, not-for-profit, public sector, private sector. And there's two kinds of boards that have emerged for me, two kinds of board protocols that have emerged for me from what I've seen. There's one board where they push management, where there's a lot of pushing of management and very demanding and driving the agenda. And then there's a second kind of board where management pulls the board in and management drives the agenda. And in my experience, it tends to be also a capacity issue. When you've got a very strong management, very capable, you find it's the latter category where it pulls and brings in the board as and when they need them. And there's a great symbiotic relationship happening. In the first kind, there may be much more tension that tends to arise because then the board is pushing the agenda. At this time, you sort of need the second kind of framework where management brings in the board as and when they need them, because right now what they're doing is really handling. They're just in the business of handling the business, ensuring that the staff are safe. Can they continue to pay staff, that they're trying to get their products and services out in as quickly and as time efficient manner as possible. So at that point, from a board perspective, it's really to just sort of sit back and come in and sort of guide at a very helicopter level and let management do what they're supposed to be doing. So the third point I want to make is, and this is something I learned over the last 4 weeks, somebody said something very profound to me, and they said that one of the things that we need to be doing as boards is ensuring that management is keeping an eye on what our look back reputation will be as an organization. And what does that mean? In 2-3 years' time, when this pandemic is over, what will our stakeholders remember us when they look back and say, did this organization take care of its staff? How are we ensuring that staff are still paid? How are we managing that whole? And that's a very big issue, a very big elephant that a lot of boards and companies are grappling with. Do we have enough runway to continue paying for our employees at this time? Should we be sending them on unpaid leave? Should we be making them redundant? Can we afford to do that? So the look back reputation on how we treat our staff will be a critical component of how we will engage with them going forward. Robin has already alluded to how the telcos and the banks are treating the customers, the removal of fees, which has seen a huge uptick. I have one colleague who was talking about a bank in Rwanda, and this particular colleague was saying that when they removed the mobile banking fees, they saw a 114% increase in liabilities, that is deposits, just because they removed the mobile to bank fee or bank to mobile fee. Very simple thing, but you see a huge uptick. So that creates a huge stickiness factor for your customers for a long time. So really keeping an eye on the look back reputation and keeping management honest in terms of, despite all the fact that you're managing through a very difficult time, how are we also going to be remembered when we come out of this pandemic? Because for sure we will.
Thank you, Caro. John, before I come to you, I want to alert everyone onto the results of the first question, which is, how would you rate the effect of COVID-19 on the role of the board of directors? I think 62% of those who have logged in and answered the question think it's very high. 28% think it's somewhat high. Really only 10% think it's medium, and 0 and very low is only 1%. So I think everyone expects the board to step up on this. I want to bring in John Olanga again. John, what are your perspectives? What are your views on how the board is going to change, how the role of the board is going to change?
Thank you, James. I think, as colleagues have said, pretty much the role generally remains the same, but the focus and the priority, I think, have changed so much to an extent that the role itself looks like it has changed, because the pandemic has called for probably what in the animal world, and especially animals in the cold and temperate regions, they would hibernate when the weather becomes very precarious. Or in the boxing world, if the jabs are coming your way, you go into what is called the fetus position, which is just to maintain survival. So it means now, as boards or members of the boards, we need to work closely with management to define our hibernation, to define this fetus position for our organizations, you see, for the companies to survive. And all of a sudden, in these conversations, and probably an admission of guilt, risk assessment and risk management moves from being an appendix to part of the forward, because now what we are facing is risk coming from all the directions as a result of this pandemic. Yes. And the focus of our conversations, I think, pretty much as what colleagues have said, when you're all talking about empathy, for example, for me and for us, the first priority should be talking about protection of our staff. To what extent? Because this is both an economic, a business, and a health crisis. So our conversations should also focus on what are we doing to protect the lives of our staff, because without them, businesses won't survive, you see. And this is a type of a pandemic that touches equally from C-suite to the shop floor, you see, and probably C-suite even more, because the more exposed you are globally, the more you are at risk to contracting the virus. So protection of our staff becomes number one priority. Minimization of shareholder value depletion becomes second priority. What are we doing? So processes, systems, the adoption of new systems, as colleagues have said, and then contribution to the survival of the livelihood and the lives of the greater society. So those are the type of conversations. Instead of now talking about growth, business strategy, it's a conversation about survival and what can we do together, board and management, so that we come through this pandemic strong enough to survive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. There are questions already coming through. I wanted to maybe just ask, and you brought something very interesting, the fetal position, and you've gone into some of the things that people need to worry about. You've even mentioned about staff. And my question would have been for Carol and Robin. You know, John, you had mentioned it at the beginning. Carol and Robin, do you see anything that the board would have done before this crisis came that would help the organization in navigating through the crisis very quickly, and then we can begin to look at the questions that that have come in.
Yeah, for me, there are two areas. One is for quite some time, we've all been trying to focus on digitalization, but I think we're probably not moving fast enough. And if anything, COVID has now made it abundantly clear that digital is priority. We've seen it in so many instances through social distance. And in Uganda, we've had a complete lockdown. So that has made it extremely important to be able to shift to digital applications, both in terms of conducting board meetings or training, but also in terms of interacting with clients and other stakeholders. So clearly, we had taken a lot of steps to digitalize, but I think we probably should have moved a lot faster, given what we know today. The other issue is, I think there have been major hiccups in implementing the business continuity programs. I think they were, in many cases, very inadequate to deal with the current situation. You have to wonder whether, looking back, we shouldn't have done a lot more to provide better access to Wi-Fi to all of our clients, to ensure that they have the best equipment to use, especially when they need to work away from home, but continue to perform in teams to deliver the work of the institution. I think there were a number of hiccups in many organizations where either they didn't even have enough data bundles, people just didn't know how to use some of the facilities as they should have. And I think it's been a great learning process. Again, post-COVID, I think we are all going to revise and look at our business continuity programs very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Carol, anything you want to add?
Yeah, James, you know, Robin's already touched on BCM, so I'll go to another element that a lot of organizations have been challenged with, and that was the whole globalization element. And now having to look back and start looking inward, not only for in terms of the sources of your raw materials, but even your customer base. I look at a country like New Zealand, where the Prime Minister just recently declared that they are now COVID-free, but they've closed, you know, they've pretty much closed the travel to external. So that's a country that's going to say, look, you know, at least we're COVID-free, we'll now ring fence ourselves and now try and grow the economy based on what is available locally. And I look at a country like Kenya or Uganda or Tanzania and ask ourselves, can we do that? You know, 25% of Kenya's GDP comes from agriculture, which a huge bunch of that is export-based agriculture. Can we afford to have a situation where we cannot be able to export our products? Tourism also forms a huge part of our GDP, both in Kenya and Tanzania. Can we say that we can't afford to bring in external tourists? Are they going to come? And there's a classic, shall I call it a crisis of sorts that's happening, that's unfolding on social media right now, because we had a very high-end boutique hotel in Karen that over the weekend posted on social media that they're now looking to open up their doors to Kenyan tourists. Now it caused a huge media storm because, and unnecessarily so, because some Kenyans have tried to go to this hotel over the last 2 years and they're told it's fully booked. Sorry, if you want to come, you know, make a booking for 2 years' time because we've got a lot of foreign tourists coming in. So you've got a lot of local tourists saying, well, you know, you didn't have time for us before. Why should we be coming now to continue your business now that your primary source, which is sort of what we call single sourcing, you know, your primary source of client base can no longer access your business. So a huge challenge. So BCM is one challenge, and the second challenge is really what happens is if we have to move away from globalization and expanding our client base beyond our borders to starting to look at our client bases from an internal perspective. Can we be able to afford that as a country, as an East African community? Can we be able to grow our client base just within the community since our borders? That's it for me.
James, if I may add just for a minute.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Just to add on what Robin has said, because I think it's also very fundamental, that technology, actually the technology we currently have in the 21st century allows most of our work processes to happen with minimum human intervention. But our work or industrial psychology is almost still like the 19th century industrial revolution psychology, where we still have that conveyor belt type of maximum human interaction. So in order for us to really make use of technology and prepare ourselves for something like this in the future, we really need a complete transformation of our work processes from paper processes, but also our psychology. Look at now, we have close to 200 people meeting from across the continent and probably from across the globe at a cost which is a fraction, probably 1% of what it would have costed us only about 3 months ago. But because the pandemic has forced us to think completely different of how we could have undertaken this work process that we are now into. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. The questions are coming in. I want to just capture some of them. If you give me 1 minute. First one, I think from Jack Makumbia. Well, he says when, and Carol, I think you can see this because it's coming out of when you use the word survival and pivoting. When key issues facing the boards are like the likes of survival and pivoting, as mentioned by Carol, isn't there a tendency towards ruthlessness on boards? How important is it in these times for boards to have members who foster an ethical stance? I mean, do you have to be ruthless, Carol? Can we have a human face? Can we be ethical? What is your response to that? And it doesn't have to be Carol, it can also be any of the panelists.
So no, you do not have to be ruthless, James. But at the end of the day, what is the role of a board? The role of a board is there to provide, I keep going back into the oversight, insight, and foresight. And one maxim that's running true very often in many places where I'm sitting is never waste a crisis. Okay, if you've been carrying fat, and if you've been having processes that were inefficient, and John and Dr. Chibuka have already alluded to that. The use of technology. If ever there's a time for using that, it's now. So we shouldn't be wasting a crisis, and we have an obligation to ensure whatever we're doing is working in the best interests of the company. Now, will that require some ruthlessness in some situations? Yes, particularly where you're having a very high staff complement that you've been dragging your feet around making decisions on. And this could possibly be the time because you have a situation where you've got a lot of a general feeling or a general perspective across many organizations of downsizing, or let me use the proper word, the politically correct term, which is right sizing. But you need to do it, and you need to do it in as humane a manner as possible. And I think for those of you who are within the Kenyan jurisdiction, you saw when one particular private equity fund or some investors bought a large hotel in Nairobi, an iconic hotel in Nairobi, and then this hotel issued a notice to staff, all right, guys, it's a wrap, it's over, we're done, we're sending you all home. The government had to intervene. It's really a factor of how was this communicated. It wasn't communicated and proper stakeholders were not engaged. It was very embarrassing, and the investors had to backtrack and then say, look, okay, we're not firing anybody. So that's the role of the board, is to keep, is to keep everyone, on an even keel. And like I said, you may create an echo chamber at a management level. And that's the role of the board, is to say, all right, what you're presenting, have you thought about this perspective and that perspective? Have you looked at your entire stakeholder universe and ensured that you've managed all the stakeholders that need to be managed?
Thank you, Caro. Maybe I'll send the next question so that John or Robin can take it. It's a question from Rose Ogega. Welcome, Rose, and thank you for the question. And she asks, can the panelists expand more on the growth mindset of a board and how we can infuse it if it does not exist? It's probably a more general question, but can we talk about growth at this point? And I know panelists did mention a little bit about the fact of surviving the pandemic and also preparing ourselves to be able to succeed, the look back view that Caro talked about. But John or Robin, can you expand a little bit on the growth mindset of the board at this time?
Yeah, I think the growth mindset of a board, actually even for individuals, is a mindset which look at mistakes and try to learn from those mistakes, rather than assume that you are not, or you are limited in your capabilities and you cannot handle problems because of your limitations. That puts you in a box. But I think if you believe that mistakes or problems are opportunities to learn, then you basically look for information and see how you can do better next time, or whether you can devise means to be able to move out of the current situation onto the next one. So a board which has a growth mindset is not focusing on growth per se, but one which is willing to learn, to bring in all the expertise they can have if they don't have it within the group, and to consult as much as possible and listen very carefully to all the stakeholders. One issue which has come up is who should be guiding innovation. A lot of people think that it should be the CEO or a select group within the organization. But I think most importantly, you have to look to your staff. They are the people who deal on a day-to-day basis with your clients. They are the people who have a very good feel of what the clients may need. So do encourage all your staff to present ideas. And those ideas should be taken and looked at very seriously. Usually you are going to find that solutions come from very simple applications, but they can take you a long, long way towards solving your problems. So it's particularly important. As I said earlier, the telcos, by suspending the mobile money fees, they really came up with a big, big win. So sometimes it's very simple ideas and they may be generated at the lower level. But you as a board must be willing to take all these ideas together and eventually pick up what may be the best for the organization. So I think that's what I would consider to be a growth mindset. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And John, while maybe you're thinking of commenting on that, we can combine it with the next question, which is COVID-19 has given the opportunity to digitalize and perhaps come up with new business models, at least in many sectors. What I am hearing is more about anxiety rather than opportunities. This is from admin. You'd want to comment. Have we made people feel so anxious, or are we giving people hope that we can survive this and emerge on the other end successful?
Thank you. I think first I will also agree with what Robin has said. If you're a member of the board, and actually my hope is every member of the board should have a growth mindset, such that whenever you are faced with any crisis, you're looking not only to manage the crisis, but also how best to capitalize or to take advantage of the crisis. But that is one. But number two, if you look at what has happened in this crisis, The companies that have taken the most advantage or have benefited the most are those in the technology industry. And that's why you could see people in technology investment have made a lot more money over the last 8 weeks than probably many others, because all of a sudden people have realized that, okay, technology is the only way to go. Now, any crisis or any change brings anxiety. You remember the move from typewriter to computers. There was a lot of anxiety on, so what will the typist do? Remember, there was even a profession called a typist, you see. And of course, probably jobs were lost. They were lost during that time. So as a board member or as a leader, you have a role to play to provide a vision of this new future, the post-pandemic or post-COVID-19 future. You have a role to provide the direction, but more importantly, the third is to provide hope that yes, in this disruption, there might be casualties, but the number of casualties will be much lower compared to the benefits that we as a collective are going to get, you see. So we have to provide that hope, constantly telling people that the future is going to be better than today. But of course, not only hope, with proper direction and strategic vision that identifies opportunity available during this crisis, but also after this crisis.
Thank you very much, John. I'll be asking, someone is asking, Michael is asking if there are some books that we can recommend for people who are joining boards, especially during this COVID-19. If any of you has any book, keep it in mind. I'll give you a chance to talk about it later. Paul Ouma, thank you. I'm just sifting through the questions. Paul Ouma is asking that this crisis is demanding higher technology and use competence at a personal level and openness to change management. How can directors use this situation to develop leadership talent? Any of you panelists who would like to respond to that from Paul Ouma? Thank you, Paul.
Sorry, James, just repeat that question.
Also, the question is, how can the board take advantage of this crisis to develop leadership talent?
Okay, if I may attempt this question. It's a very good question, but what I've discovered in the last 8 weeks or so is that because of the new applications in digital and virtual applications, there are now numerous opportunities to go online and either attend webinars as people are doing today, but you can also participate in a number of other training opportunities online. And I think you are going to find a lot of material. If you are curious enough, there is going to be a lot of material which you can use at the moment to be able to learn new things. But you can also take advantage, of course, on opportunities offered by Strathmore University and other institutions, and take a very active role, a very proactive role in trying to pick up new skills. There are opportunities all over the place. I think what has actually happened now is our bodies may be not able to move from place to place, but our minds now have many, many opportunities offered by the digital platform for us to be able to learn all sorts of new skills. So I think take advantage of what there is on the virtual platform.
Thank you. There is one question here from David Mugun, and it's quite controversial. I know some of the members that Carol mentioned already on the board, on this webinar. David is asking, the present situation has rendered some board members obsolete, given the present dynamics. I'm not quite sure why they rendered obsolete, but who in the board is best placed as the bearer of the bad news to concerned directors? If we need to change the board because of the demands of the current time, we have protocols in the board to deal with this. How would you go about it? Carol, you know, as a lady, you're likely to be more sensitive in answering this question.
Well, well, first of all, I'm going to assume that David, who I do know, that David is asking this with a tongue in cheek. It's a fairly cheeky question, because, you know, I can't turn to my colleague and say, you know, yo, bro, you know, you're just not stepping up to the plate. You know, it's time for you to step down. You know, leadership is situational, and in every situation, in some crisis, some board members will step up far, you know, further than others, simply because A, they're familiar with this, or B, their skills are required at this particular time. Now, a board and its composition is something that should be worrying the board chair at any given time. And this is something that a board chair is constantly thinking about, and a board nomination committee. Is this board fit for purpose? And will this board be fit for purpose of the current, you know, in the current, as well as in the midterm, as well as in the long term? So that's a never-ending conversation that a board chair and a board nomination committee are having. So I think, and I say this to David directly, David, I think that's an unfair point to make at this point, because yes, some people will be obsolete now, but you may find that you will require them next year when there's a completely different shift in what the organization is facing.
Thank you, Carol. I'm going to pull David Zia when I meet him, because I know him for being cheeky. Carol, I'm still with you. There is Rachel, who has actually said, if you could clarify, you know, we talked about the two styles, the one of board pushing and management pulling the board, when the two styles are relevant to our business.
So if you'll allow me, Rachel and I have been communicating on the chat, because she then put it on the private. So I asked her that. I responded to her, and you're going to forgive me for doing this, but there's two questions from Jane Mwai and Jimmy Mugera, both of whom are asking the same question. And they're asking if management were to be asked what kind of board they would like. And maybe I'd like to throw the question, because, you know, you can't throw the question to attendees, but maybe to ask my colleagues, John Ulanga and Dr. Robin Chibuka, to answer and say, what do you think management would say if they were to be asked what kind of board they would like at this time? And maybe it speaks to James, the question that Rachel was asking about what kind of board should be managing now. Is it a board that pushes or a management that's pulling? Sorry, James.
Yes, and I like that you're the one who brought up the two styles, and I'm sure the other panelists were keen to even hear more, and they have a view on it. So Robin, John, your perspectives on that?
No, that's a very good question, but very difficult one at the same time. Yes, I think you can characterize the situation as board pull or management, rather board push or management pull. But to me, I think what is really critical is how effective the entire board is working together with management. I think you can be able to improve on the relationship through better communications, through better training and shared experiences. I think the more you get to know your individual board members and senior management, the more you get to know them, the more comfortable you become with them. And I think in the process, you do build confidence and trust, and you are able to capitalize on the various strengths and synergies of the board to be able to deal with a number of questions. And the situation is very, very fluid at this point in time. And clearly management is facing a crisis in dealing with day-to-day issues. And they will clearly want to ask the board to give them a lot of inputs. But I think it should not be just one or the other. It's going to vary from situation to situation, from board meeting to board meeting. And I think in a period of crisis, it's probably much better to try to work together as a team and to try to work through the problems as much as possible, rather than say that this is the ideal board for this situation. Each organization is very, very different, and the situation is very, very fluid. It's going to be changing very, very rapidly at any given time.
I think I agree with what Robin has just said. It's like if you're in a car and then all of a sudden it got into a trench and you need to get it out. The driver, the passengers, the traffic policeman, they will all help to push or pull the car out of the trench. And then once it gets back on the road, everyone will take their position. So now board, management, shareholders, we all have to work together, think together, co-create. So we go into more of moving from 35,000 feet into 10,000 feet, do the co-creation so that we go into a mode that we all are sure we can survive, and then we go back, take our seats. So I think now the management who likes a board who is more of roll up their sleeves, more of putting inputs as opposed to critique. And then once we go into positions, into normal position, if any, there's going to be any normal position in the near future, then we go into those normal hats that we usually wear.
Thank you, John. I just want to draw attention of participants, those who asked about the books that they would like to know which books to read on boards. There are a number of answers that are provided on the chat room. So I would suggest that you go through that. Someone has also suggested that they can enroll to some programs at the business school, and they say they have benefited from it. So I suggest that you can pick the answer to that from the chat room. There were some questions that were sent, but as people registered for this, I think most of them have more or less been addressed. But there's one that has come up. There's a question about how the boards can best overcome or navigate less resistance to change, especially because everyone is new to this unprecedented situation and no one has a silver bullet. Maybe I'll ask the panelists to think about that. And there's also someone who is asking, comment on how to make virtual meetings more effective, especially in crisis management. I think there are various tools that are being used. And I believe that for those who are in some of the program at SBS, they've been taken through how you can use the virtual tools. And I believe that it's something that management of companies should really do for their board members. Which, as someone mentioned already, we present a crisis, make someone realizes how they need to survive, and they're going to learn very quickly. So maybe that we don't need to go through that at this time. And the second question, I think that I can ask the panelists to talk about, and I'll leave you panelists to choose which one you want to respond to, the one on change management, and this one on would mergers be something to consider as way forward in the long run to ensure sustainability, especially for SMEs. Over to you, panelists, anyone who wants to respond to those two questions, resistance to change, as well as whether mergers would help people navigating through the crisis.
James, maybe let me start with the change question. And we have our health minister on record and giving us one of the most classic Kenyanisms. If you treat this disease abnormally, it will treat you abnormally. And it's the same, and that rings true across all our businesses now in terms of what this pandemic is forcing and what technology is doing. Let me not go into cliches and let me go into an actual true story. I sit on a public sector, on a parastatal board. And for those who've sat on parastatal boards, you know that the SCAC, which is a State Corporation Advisory Council, requires state corporations to undertake an annual board evaluation. Now, the simplest way to undertake a board evaluation is just to send everybody the questionnaire electronically, let them do it in their own time, at their own leisure, and then submit it back to the evaluator who puts together the report. But not my dear friends, and I hope, I don't know if any of them are represented here, but I'll stand by my word. No, what they insist on doing is that you must all get together in one room, all the board members at the same time, and you're all given a document to fill out. And this document is that thick. And this document requires you to evaluate your board, but more importantly, for you to evaluate your colleagues who are seated next to you in that room. Now, I'm sitting here having to evaluate a colleague who may, to use David Mugun's word, might be obsolete, might not be exactly really great in their game. But can you imagine writing very honest feedback, let's say about my colleague, John, who is a fantastic colleague over there, John Ulanga. But imagine if I'm writing really nasty stuff and I'm seated right next to him. Now, that's a lot of pressure to bear on you, right? So you can't exactly be very honest. Anyway, long story short, you're required to do all of this. And we've been asking for years, can we please move to an electronic methodology? And they're like, no, 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 this is the way things are done. In June, we've just scheduled the board evaluation for this parastatal that I sit on. It's going to be in July. And James, this is going to be done electronically. They've booked us a Zoom room, and I can't wait to see it. I'm really excited to see it. But because of COVID, the SCAC has now been forced to move to board evaluations online. So the upshot of this story is, if you don't change, something else will force you to change eventually. So do you want to be at the tail end of that change mechanism, or do you want to be at the front end? Whether they'll do it successfully, I'll let you know if we ever meet after July.
Okay.
To add what Carol has said, rightly so, I usually throw to people a quote by Charles Darwin, which you probably all know. That it is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. And I sometimes ask them, where did they think the dinosaurs went? They just did not disappear. They were not adaptable to change. So I think one of opportunity, I sit in an advisory board of a public entity. And for the first time a month ago, we held our board meeting virtually like this. And I had to train the management and train the rest of the board members on how to use Teams meeting. And we had one of the most efficient Teams meeting, and the management came to me and said, thank you very much for enabling this. So I think there's an opportunity to change, and if each and every one of us takes advantage, we might not succeed all the time, but for the success that we'll have, we'll drive change for the better.
Thank you. Robin?
I fully concur with my colleagues. I think change is inevitable, particularly when you're in a paradigm shift, because all our values, everything we've known in the past has now changed, and we have to adapt to the situation. And I think in a crisis, resilience comes from speed. So those who act fast are the ones who are going to be able to reap the benefits. It's going to be very risky, particularly as we've said earlier, that we may actually be seeing only 5% of the risk which face the institution. But I think given the circumstances, you cannot stand still. You have to keep moving and moving and moving. Obviously, it's going to require a lot of discussions. There is going to be a lot of pushback, both and back and forth. But ultimately, I think as a board, you have to come together and decide that, yes, change is inevitable. Change has to occur. And let's move as fast as we can, but also be able to adapt and correct course as you move ahead. It's a very difficult situation, but I don't think you can resist change, because if you do, as John said, you are going to become a dinosaur.
Thank you, panelists. We're coming to near the end. Dr. Ndemo, I've seen your question. I'm coming to it shortly, but before that, Jimmy Mugerwa has made a comment, which essentially he's saying, if we reverse the discussion and given the challenges and opportunities that COVID-19 has brought, it will be interesting to hear what management would like to see as the changes in the interactions with the board. Now, we have board members who have joined in on this, but we also have managers. It'd be a good service to the board members to hear what those who are in management would like to see. So I suggest that we can hear some comment, or we can get some comments to the board members from people who are in management as to what kind of interactions they would like to have with board members at this particular time. And I believe that those who are board members and on this webinar will take note and will see what they need to do. If I can scroll down to Dr. Bitambo Ndemo, give me 1 minute. There's a question that I think you've asked and which I would like to I cannot find this particular question. I'm sure I've seen it somewhere. Let me just let me ask as I'm looking for that last question. Can I ask panelists maybe to talk about the question around mergers, whether mergers are an answer to this this issue?
Thanks. Dr. Ndemo is saying it says, I think he's operating as under there's somebody else, Wanjiru Macharia. It says Ndemo here.
Oh yes, I've seen it, Carol. Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's been asked. The reason I couldn't locate it again is because it was asked. He asked privately, "What are your views with respect to emerging concept of future of work?" The board's preparing for this strategic issue. The reason I picked that is the mere mention of the word "the future of work." When we started with this pandemic, a lot of people are like, "The world is changed forever, completely." Suddenly, I have seen people who have started going back to the office, people who are feeling more comfortable being in an office environment. And even before the pandemic, we were talking about the future of work. What Dr. Ndemo then is asking is, what are your views in respect to this emerging concept of future of work? And I think that will be the last question before we go to the final preliminaries. We could start with Robin.
That's a very difficult one. The way I look at things is that I think COVID has totally changed the way we relate to each other and the way we work together. And I think even if people go back to the office, health concerns are going to be there. And that may make it very difficult for people to come together in small meetings, conduct meetings, or design teamwork or strategy or whatever the case may be. And people may be forced to go back to their office and connect through the computer or online or whatever the case may be. But also the nature of the business is going to be radically different. Remember, clients are not interested in products anymore. They are more interested in services and the customer experience. As Carol was saying, restaurants are no longer going to be able to set up nicely to serve people who come to the restaurant. It may be that they want to provide takeaway or to deliver. Yesterday, I had a very interesting example where a pizza company, I believe in Nairobi, has switched to delivering pizza ingredients to homes. So their clients can be able to make pizza from home using the ingredients from the restaurant. The point I'm making is that you may find that the chef is not there to provide meals to customers. The nature of the job is going to be changing very rapidly, and the workplace itself has to change accordingly. It's too early, I think, to tell how this is going to fully impact, but I think we better be ready to face some new changes, because a lot of people are looking at a lot of businesses very, very differently. People are very worried to carry cash. People don't want to go to crowded places. I've stopped buying newspapers. I've gone entirely online because of health concerns. So who knows what the future has?
Yeah, just to add a couple of thoughts. There has there has been this conversation about the future of work for at least the last 5 years. And when we were talking about issues around artificial intelligence, talking about, for example, the World Economic Forum was talking about the jobs that are going to be most relevant in the next 10 years. Those are going to be redundant. But I think that this pandemic has brought that conversation now and requires us to be prepared now. So the future has kind of fast forwarded to now. It's not about 2025 anymore. And that's why you'll see when we are talking about everyone can work from home, jobs that are going to be most endangered cannot work from home the way you and me are doing this thing of working from home. So it means boards, but not only for boards, policymakers have to start this conversation now of what type of skill set do we need to prepare in the next 10 to 15 years to prepare our people in a complete different world setup. And of course, as boards of companies, we have to have those conversations in terms of the skill set of our people now. Do we have people who have the right skill mix for the future of work, which is now actually the present of work, not any longer the future?
Thank you, John. Carol?
James, I'll just speak about my own example, just not even about the boards I'm involved in. I'll talk about my own office. I have a small office, a small consultancy. I have 7 staff. And since it was announced that we need to go into sort of a lockdown in Nairobi, I told everybody go and work from home. That was March 12th. Now, what has happened, they've all gone. I'm the only one. I tried working out of home for 1 week. It was an absolute pain smash because my house is just not catered towards. I didn't have a study or anything. So I tried working out for a week, struggled, second week struggled, third week I said, you know what, there's nobody in the office. Let me just come back to the office, okay? Now I find myself with all of this space. What have I done? I've converted it into a school because I've got a 17-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they're doing remote learning, and they require some, at least the younger one requires some oversight. So I've converted all the offices. Each one of my daughters gets a space, and that's where they're operating school from. But more importantly, what has it done for my staff, particularly my associates? They have absolutely thrived in this time. They're no longer doing commute. One of them used to commute from Thika Road and used to spend an average of 2.5 hours in the morning trying to get to work, and then an hour to recover from that commute. So you can imagine what it did for productivity. Now, what has that done for productivity since we moved to working from home? It's shot through the roof. And the creativity and just the enjoyment of work. So as an employer myself, I'm like, you know what? So we do team meetings once a week virtually. And I'm like, actually, to be honest, I'm actually liking being alone in this space. There's lots I can get to sit in a different space all the time. And they're enjoying not commuting. What's the flip side of that? So there's a downside, is that camaraderie, and the only thing that benefit we have is that we had already established a camaraderie before COVID happens. Now, it's difficult to create the same level of camaraderie on the virtual space. And so my concern is that even if you start having people working from home, and we talk about how it's great to have remote working and everything, what does that do for building staff morale and building trust within an organization? There's institutional trust and there's personal trust. Institutional trust is that if I give something to finance, it will be done because of people there. But personal trust is where I know if I give it to Tom, Tom will get something done. How do I build that personal trust when we're operating in this virtual space? So for me, that's where the challenge is with regards to future of work.
Thank you, Carol. I'd like to invite the panelists to give their last word, but I also would like to acknowledge all the comments and all the questions and suggestions that have been put. There's a lot of information that is on the chat room. For those of you who wanted to that information, please check what is there. Let me start now with this time I'll end with whoever I started with. So I'll start from the bottom. Start with Dr. Shibuka, your last word.
Okay, thank you very much, James. I think this has been an excellent exchange. I'd like to leave just 4 points on the table for people to consider. One is please take time to recognize how people depend on your organization, whether it's clients, stakeholders, other stakeholders or whatever, suppliers. I think that's very, very important, especially as you navigate into the future. Strengthen the capability to engage and work with regulators and government. Why is that? I think the market, people's confidence in market solutions has been shaken. And I think you may actually see regulators and governments stepping in very aggressively. So it's very important to be able to work with governments and regulators. We've talked a lot about the COVID risks, but please don't forget there are a lot of non-COVID risks which are still lurking out there, and they are still important to your organization. So please keep an eye out for those. Finally, find out what went wrong. For instance, why were there delays in implementing digital solutions? Why were your business continuity program not as effective as it should have been? Find out what has gone wrong and try to fix it now. Don't wait until the next crisis. I'd like to thank you very much for participating in this seminar. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Chibuka. John?
Thank you. I also enjoyed the conversation. For me, probably the parting message, and this has been my constant message throughout this period, is as boards, we should help companies to do three things. One, hibernate for survival, and we've talked about it. Number two, innovate for sustainability. This is the time, whether it's technology or another type of innovation. And number three, implement whatever that you have come up with for recovery and success. So for me, those are the three key messages that I think are important for this period and after.
Thank you, John. Last but not least, Carol.
James, first of all, thanks very much for an excellent moderated session. I appreciate that, and I appreciate my colleagues on the panel as well, Dr. Chibuka and John. My last thoughts are literally what I said at the beginning, what I learned from somebody, which is, what will your organization, when people have the look-back reputation, what will the look-back reputation of your organization be? When people look back in 2023 and say, what did this organization do for its staff, and what did it do for its suppliers? What did it do for its general stakeholder universe? We've got to keep that in mind as boards. Even though we're trying to punch out of this challenge, we've got to remember, what will people remember us for? Did we treat our staff right? Did we treat our suppliers right? Did we treat our customers right?
Carol, thank you, John. Thank you, Dr. Chibuka. Thank you, everyone. I have to say that I'm not qualified at all to try and summarize all these great ideas that have been discussed today. Everyone has been great. I really appreciate. I hope each and everyone has picked something that is going to help them to navigate this new world, and especially to make our organizations a lot more successful. Let me then take this opportunity to give a vote of thanks to everyone. I have to start with participants, because if you weren't here, then we wouldn't have done, it should have been ourselves talking to ourselves. Almost 200 of you logged into this webinar. I'm so glad, because the knowledge that we have basically imparted, I hope that it's going to help our country. Panelists, you've been very great. We couldn't have picked a better panel to do this. As I did the introduction of the panelists, all of you noted how wide in terms of knowledge they were, and that has come through, and I'm really grateful that you made my work a lot easier. I want to thank SBS for hosting this webinar, and obviously look forward to more webinars. I think they will be sending the future webinars that will be done, because a number of them have been lined up. And I want to wish everyone a good day, and bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.